Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It just depends when you're watching this flip video. This is the flip video for chapter 6.1b. And I've titled this video Wobblies with a Side of Everett Massacre and Centralia Massacre. And even though this is kind of a funny title, this is actually a pretty serious topic. And as I was researching it, it definitely leaves you in the pit of your stomach feeling like, ugh. So, let's continue, or let's begin. Before we can get into the actual massacres, we need to talk a little bit more about the IWW. Now this stood for the Industrial Workers of the World. In the previous video, we also found out that they were called the Wobblies for short. Now, the Wobblies welcomed everyone into their union. All workers, all types of people, women, men, immigrants, skilled labor, unskilled. Unions had a choice of allowing certain people into their unions or not. Well, the IWW wanted what was called one big union. Remember we talked about unions were put together because there was strength in numbers. Well, if you have one big union, that's a lot of strength. So their goal was to put all the unions together, not to have a bunch of separate ones all over the place. They started off in 1905 in Chicago. And in 1906, they helped the Spokane ironworkers threaten to walk out because they wanted a 9-hour workday. I mean, what were they thinking? 9 hours? Way too short. Well, the IWW wanted to overthrow capitalism. And in class we've discussed, and I've hinted at, that capitalism is the idea that the private person can own land and own businesses. Well, they didn't want that. They wanted a group effort. Now, they would speak out in public, whether it was in parks or street corners, and because of that, a lot of cities passed bylaws or laws or ordinances not allowing people to speak on street corners, or at least they had to be a certain distance away from street corners. Now, this is interesting facts here. The IWW had 20 meeting or free speeches. They had 33 strikes, and there were 22 acts of persecution against them during a 10-year span in Washington state. That's crazy. Please take a moment, and I'd like you to pause the video, and I'd like you to look at these comics I have posted up about the IWW. Now this one here is one from Italy, even though it still kind of talks about what the IWW was all about. This one does as well. Kind of tells you what they wanted people to start thinking about. Well, let's get into the Everett Massacre. This it actually happened in 1916. Some background. First off, Everett didn't allow speakers on street corners, and they said it was for safety. There was a specific street called Hewitt Avenue, which was one of the busiest streets. It was kind of the city center. They did not want people speaking there. Now, the Salvation Army preachers would preach there, and of course the Wobblies thought, hey, free speech, if the Salvation Army preachers can, why can't we? So they would go and they would stand next to the Salvation Army people and they would preach, hoping that, being next to a preacher, that they wouldn't get, thrown out for speaking up against big businesses. Now, they did feel that this law limited their free speech, because what ended up happening is sheriffs or police officers would come and would pull them off their soapboxes and throw them in jail and then say, don't do it again. And then they'd let them leave. I'm going to go on a slightly different topic here, away from Wobblies speaking on soapboxes about the evils of big business. However, I'm going to tie in these preaching Wobblies with my next topic, so just bear with me. So the shingle workers in Everett, for a while, got paid really good money. Then World War I happened and prices started to fall and their wages got cut. Now, of course, these shingle workers didn't like that and they threatened to go on strike. So the business owners, they got together, they huddled up and go, oh, what are we going to do? They're going to strike. We'll lose our workers. So they decided that they would promise the workers more money when the war was done or when it got close to ending. And the workers were okay with that. They're like, okay, sure, we'll keep working. Well, it got closer to the end of the war, or the war was almost done or was over, and the workers were waiting for their wage increase, and it never happened. So finally, the shingle workers went on strike for this pay that they were promised. Strike breakers were brought in, obviously, to get the strikers back to work, and some of these strikers got beat by the strike breakers. Wobblies now were also sent up from Seattle to speak out in support of the striking shingle workers. Now remember back to our previous, like a couple minutes ago, how they weren't allowed to speak on Hewitt Avenue, or at least too close to it. Well, guess what? The Wobblies did it anyways. So what would happen is Sheriff McCrae here would haul the Wobbly off his or her soapbox and throw him in jail. And as soon as he did that, another Wobbly would go on the exact same soapbox and would start speaking out against the shingle owners. That person would get hauled down off their soapbox. And this happened. And so there's a lot of tension going on because these Wobbly guys are speaking out in favor of the shingle workers who were on strike. Now the sheriff was also running Wobblies out of town. Of course, the mill owners were quite pleased with this because the Wobblies are causing problems. So we have a lot of tension going on here. A lot of people are frustrated what's going on here. The Wobblies are speaking out. The mill owners are like, "Ah, stop talking, Wobblies." October 30th, 1916. A small boat carrying some Wobblies came to speak, again at this busy corner in Everett. Now they came up from Seattle. Well, the sheriff and their deputies met them at the docks. And they said to these Wobblies, "You can speak, but it can't be in the town center." Well, the Wobblies probably knew that, hey, if we don't speak at the town center, no one's going to hear our message. So they refused. Well, Sheriff McCrae and his deputies rounded all these Wobblies up, put them on some trucks, took them out of town in the woods, and they beat them bad. So bad that the next day when people came out to investigate, they saw blood and they actually saw teeth. And they actually had these people run on these train tracks in a gauntlet form, and as these guys ran by, boom, boom, boom from either side. Pretty bad. Well, tensions were now even higher after this investigation. About a month later, not even a month, a couple of weeks it looks like, even a week, I can't do math. November 5th, 1916, 300 Wobblies are sent on 2 ships from Seattle to Everett for a public demonstration. While the Everett authorities, which includes Sheriff McCrae, were told they're coming, and for whatever reason, whether they were told or they just assumed, they thought these Wobblies were coming to burn the city of Everett. So, 200 deputized people with Sheriff McCrae meet these Wobblies at the docks, this dock right here. McCrae yells out, "Who's your leader?" The Wobblies yell back, "We're all leaders!" Sheriff McCrae responds, "You can't land here!" Then, boom! Shot fired, followed by several minutes of crazed gunfire. All on this dock. So crazy that everyone who was on this side of the boat ran to this side of the boat, making the ship almost capsize. The outcome? 2 deputies and 5 Wobblies are shot and killed. 27 people are wounded. And people think that as many as 12 Wobblies died when the boat almost capsized because these bodies were never found. By the way, these are face casts taken from the deceased Wobbly men. Sorry if I scared anybody. Now, let's talk about the Centralia Massacre. This is another big event that happened for labor in Washington State history. This happened in 1919, so after World War I's done. So there was a parade for Armistice Day. This was a way to celebrate the end of World War I. And this parade in Centralia had veterans, people in the Elk Club, Boy Scouts, and the Red Cross in it. Now, for whatever reason, the leader of the veterans, Lieutenant Grimm, told everyone to stop in front of the IWW headquarters of Centralia. Now, the Wobblies had been warned before the parade that there could be a raid of their headquarters. And so they had planned out what they were going to do. They had guys stationed in their headquarters around the area. In fact, their Wobblies lawyer had said that, hey, the Wobblies were entitled to protect their property if it came to that. Well, some men went in after Lieutenant Grimm told them to stop, and in the end, after everything happened, unfortunately 4 veterans were shot and killed. 3 of those veterans were killed by this man here, Wesley Everest, who was part of the IWW. He was a Wobbly, but he was also a World War I veteran. Everest was eventually captured, and a crazed mob almost lynched him in front of the Centralia jail. The parade marshal stopped them, luckily. Later that night, though, Everest was busted out of jail, and he was hung from this bridge over the Chehalis River. He was also probably shot at. So this ends this flip video. Please go to Edmodo to answer the questions I have up there.